All right, CADs, we are live. Welcome to the show. Welcome to another episode of CAD Live with me, Troy Francis. And today I'm joined by a very special guest who is Mr. Black Label Logic, famed for his world-class treatise on gendernomics. He's written 2 books on that subject. He has a very popular Twitter feed where he talks about, all manner of degenerate and decadent things, and all-round manosphere commentator and raconteur. Hi, Carl. How's it going? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good, man. This is the first time I think in forever I'm doing a podcast completely sober.
Oh, really? Okay. I thought you were going to say completely naked then, actually. But I mean, I suppose there's
Hard
a sort
to do,
of
man.
Yeah, I'm naked from the waist down. Actually, I always prefer to wear as little as possible when I do these things. Partly because I've got a new light. I invested in a massive bright light, and I can see now why John MLD wears those shades, because it's really hot and it's really bright.
Oh, you got one of those Instagram ass model lights that Ryan runs to kind of light up your eyes?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I haven't got all the filters and whatever shit he's using, but we'll get there. We'll get there. But anyway,
man,
thanks.
I'm glad I'm not on camera.
Well, man, I mean, my skin care and exfoliating routine is something to behold. I tell you, since I started doing this, I actually preferred. I mean, we can get into the whole thing about anons and stuff later, but I actually preferred it before. I mean, I never really wanted to be somebody who was doing shows on YouTube and doing videos and things. I only got into it because, I don't know, it kind of, if you want to make this your full-time gig, it kind of seems like you have to, and I think there is some value in it. But I mean, man, I really like being an anon, and I think actually there's a lot of benefits to it, because you can say things that perhaps you wouldn't say as a, when you're out there front and center, if you like.
Yeah, it's also because I have DM conversations with a lot of the guys on Twitter.
Yeah.
And we have some real corporate and government heavy hitters that are actually following us.
Yeah.
And those guys could never go on and on. And it's kind of similar to my situation, but I liked it back when everyone was anon, just because it was so much harder to bullshit people.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Oh, my mic stand is just. I've got some new equipment. I've got this mic stand thing as well, and it's just limply falling now, like a like a MGTOW's
boom,
like a MGTOW's erection. Yeah,
is that the boom stand for the? You got the boom stand for the Yeti, or do you have like a regular table stand?
It's just a cheap one off Amazon. Actually, it's nothing special, but it's definitely better. But I just need to tighten my nuts, because as I say, it's sort of depleting like a Noah Revoy's erection after the 21 convention.
Yeah, fair enough. That was actually one of the funnier things, because I have one of those Yeti mics too set up on a boom stand.
Yeah.
And my entire office thing is set up in my bedroom, and that was always when I used to bring girls back here. They'd all be like, "What the fuck is that mic?"
Yeah. It's kind of weird. I haven't actually brought anyone back to where I've got this set up, but I think it looks pretty kind of weird if they see this. I'm like, what the hell? But anyway, listen. So what we wanted to talk about today, I mean, like last time you were on a week or so ago, we had a really great chat, and we kind of just free-willed it, which is cool. Obviously, we've titled this MDMA, Make Degeneracy Magnificent Again, and I have to give you credit for that, because you came up with that last time, and I thought it was so good that we had to use it. So well done for that.
Oh, thank you.
It's okay. But this whole thing about degeneracy and stuff, I mean, this is partly jokey and partly serious, because I don't know what you think about this, Carl, but it seems to me that on Twitter in particular, I and probably you and other people that we know get a lot of stick from more traditionalist type individuals, and they will often use this word degeneracy in order to describe, modes of conduct that they don't think are appropriate. And I think the use of this word degeneracy got really popularized off like 4chan, I think, or one of those kind of places. So it's been sort of like knocking around in those kind of spaces for a while. Certainly since 2016, or certainly since that sort of schism started to happen, when you had the traditionalists, making a big noise on social media versus the I guess just the red pill guys who were just players who wanted to just go out and meet girls. So this term degeneracy has been sort of bandied around for a while now, and it gets thrown at me and other people. But I would suggest that when they talk about degeneracy, what they're actually talking about is what most normal people who don't live in their mum's basement would just call having a good time.
Well, I agree, and if you want degeneracy, like read The Dirt by like the biography of Motley Crue. Now that's fucking degeneracy, man.
Yeah,
stealing a homeless girl's dress in the middle of a cocaine binge, then gang banging her and throwing the TV out of the hotel room. That's kind of degeneracy. But I think the word is starting to become a bit like the word racist in that it's been used in so many contexts where it's not really appropriate. It's almost to the point where unless you're banging your wife that you married at 16 through a sheet, and you better make sure that hole isn't too big, you're a degenerate.
Well, it seems that way to me because, I mean, like, I basically, my Twitter feed is kind of all sorts of nonsense these days. But I mean, initially I was just tweeting as a game advice person. I was tweeting game advice and, how to meet girls and blah, blah, blah. And then you get these people going, well, this is degenerate. And usually they were people who were pushing this idea that, in order to be a real man and, whatever, you need to wife up a fat chick and get a truck and go and live in Montana or on a farm and raise 17 children and, all of that kind of thing. And really all I was ever talking about was, well, why don't you go to the club and talk to some girls and, maybe have some fun with, some cool girls kind of thing. So I didn't think now, to be fair, I have also talked a lot about some much more degenerate stuff than that. So I've written about, the BDSM scene, the fetish scene, all of that kind of thing, which I suppose some people might regard as being a bit more like near the knuckle. But even then, if you actually read my book, the first 50 Shades of Game book, which is all about the BDSM scene, I mean, I talk a lot about how I was pretty much somebody who just went along to those parties. I wasn't even that into it. I just went along because there were cute girls there. If you go to these parties in London or pre-COVID, you just get a bunch of cute girls basically in their underwear in a nightclub up for having wild, crazy adventures. I mean, for me, that was awesome. I don't see that as being particularly like degenerate. That was just like a guy who wanted to meet cute girls having a good time, right?
It's not that different from going to the beach. It's the same dress code, more or less. You get the same vibe from it to some extent. It's only like it's a loaded sexual space. But I think more of it is just that there was this weird like gangbang between like the traditionalist guys who want to move to Montana and live in a cabin.
Yes.
With the guys who are ascetics, they try to kind of remove themselves from all kinds of worldly pleasure.
Yeah.
And then you have the minimalist aspect of that. So it becomes like this weird trifecta of, okay, you have to be traditional, but you shouldn't be consumerist or enjoy anything. And you also have to, have a minimal dependence on anything. And that kind of got to me because like you can see the benefits of something like fasting just so you learn what being hungry actually feels like. Or occasionally doing things like that or, cleanses, whatever. If you've been like on a week binge, it's nice to take a couple of days off and just drink water.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the difficulty that I've got as an individual is that I kind of buy into little bits of these different things. I mean, I don't really buy into the traditionalist thing, but the minimalist thing, I certainly buy into. And I don't know that they're necessarily as contradictory as people would think, but perhaps we could get to that in a minute. But I think overall, I would say that what we're talking about here is a preference for the sensual over the utilitarian. I think, like what guys like me are saying is like, yeah, you can learn these different techniques. You can get better at socializing. You can go out and meet different girls and you can have a fun time. And by the way, why not go to Berlin or go to Ibiza or go to Vegas and, party it up a bit. And then you've got guys on the other side of that who are sort of saying, well, no, that behavior is, I guess, damaging the fabric of society in the end because you're encouraging women to be, loose in their morals. You're just sort of furthering this whole thing where Western civilization, if you like, is going down the pan. And I guess my counter argument is always, well, kind of enjoy the decline because you're not really gonna, a few individuals on the internet going to Vegas, going to the pool party aren't really gonna make any difference either way, so it doesn't matter. But I guess it kind of comes down to that, right? Do you agree
Well,
that sort of utilitarian?
Yeah, it's an interesting dimension, utilitarian versus the, let's say, sensual or hedonistic.
Yes.
It's kind of like Apollo and Dionysus.
Yeah.
But for me, it's also the kind of aspect of you're not allowed to have any fun ever, and you should always feel bad if you had fun. So you have that weird kind of Catholic guilt twisted into it too.
Yeah. Well, that's true. And I mean, ironically, you could argue that what we're seeing now with COVID and all the restrictions is actually that kind of thing on steroids, albeit, there's a different pretext for it. But I mean, we're seeing more and more in the UK, there's all of these restrictions. I mean, obviously nightclubs are pretty much finished. Bars are kind of now being told to close early, and et cetera, et cetera. And some people are making the argument, well, this is basically like Puritanism being snuck in under the guise of public safety. So in a funny way, what's happened with COVID this year and the restrictions has actually given these guys kind of what they wanted in a weird way. But ironically, the same people who rail against degeneracy are also likely to be the same kind of right wingers who are anti-mask and anti-lockdown and all the rest of it. So it's kind of like, but in a sense, didn't you want a really ordered society where everyone has to sit at home and do what they're told?
Well, I think it's kind of, I don't want to use the term cognitive dissonance, but I think I think it's a lot like champagne socialists, if you're familiar with the term.
Yeah.
Just to explain that to everyone else, a champagne socialist is someone who wants everyone else to practice socialism while they act as a capitalist, in a sense. And I think that's part of the key here too. They want everyone else to be ordered and moral and follow the rules, and the rules don't apply to themselves. So everyone else has to stay at home, everyone else has to wear a mask, but except me, because I could never get sick.
Yeah, for sure. But it only just struck me just then, actually, when I was saying that. But it is kind of weird, isn't it, in a way? Because if you look at a lot of and listen, I mean, I'm lockdown skeptical. I'm not in favor of those restrictions. Masks, I'm not so bothered about, really. I mean, I'd rather wear a mask than be locked in my house for 3 months. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not so bothered about masks as some people are. But so I kind of get where they're coming from. But at the same time, there is a bit of a mismatch, isn't there? Because a lot of these very same people will be railing against the Dems, against Hollywood, and all the rest of this stuff. And it will be like, oh, if only we had a much more ordered society, things would be so much better. And then when the governments do start to bring in these more authoritarian type measures, they're all up in arms about it. I mean, it's like, make your mind up, guys.
Well, I think it's more that every capitalist secretly wants to be a monopolist, and every politician engaged in a democracy really wants to be a dictator. And I think it comes down to that. They wouldn't mind the restrictions if the restrictions weren't affecting them, or were like, they would love a restriction for chastity belts for all women so they couldn't be degenerates. Or, those ball cages for men, but they don't like wearing a mask. And just in general on that, for me, like, I don't really mind the restrictions as long as they make sense. And, I can buy into a lockdown if it's a logical thing to it. Like, okay, minimize your social contacts, just don't go outside unless you need to, etc., for a limited time. And I could also accept, like, okay, if you're in a crowded space, or where it's hard to keep, a reasonable distance to the other person, then wear one. Like if you're in the subway or something like that, where you have to stand on top on someone in the rush. But to be honest, like when I take the subway in the rush, I kind of want to wear a full covering suit anyway, because the people on the subway are fucking disgusting.
Yes, absolutely. There was once a study I read of the London Underground, and somebody did they took one of the seats or the seat coverings, and they did an analysis of what was on it, and they found, I think it was 7 different types of fecal matter on this one seat from the Piccadilly line, which kind of makes you think a little bit about what you can get on that thing. So yeah, I mean, I like, to me, masks are. I mean, like we have the journalist over here, Peter Hitchins, the brother of Christopher Hitchins, who's banging on about. And I agree with a lot of what he says, but he's banging on about, our masks are, they're a method to depersonalize us and all this kind of thing because you're covering the face, and blah, blah, blah. And I kind of get where he's coming from, but to be honest, I'm not that, but I mean, like in the big scheme of things, as long as I'm allowed out the house, if I have to wear something over my, wear a bandana or something, I'm not going to like cry about it. I actually quite like wearing them sometimes. Anyway, it's quite nice to just go around and feel a bit incognito.
And to be honest with you, with all the CCTV in London, I wouldn't mind wearing one full time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Someone needs to ask Peter Hitchins, what's worse, being depersonalized or having MI5 know where you are at any time?
Yeah, that's a good point. But he's been doing sterling work, sort of like challenging the some of the lockdown sort of. I mean, like you say, I don't think. I mean, his point is that he's not necessarily against the measures, but he is against the compulsion of some of these measures. Rather than make it all voluntary and blah blah blah.
Yeah, but I think we can kind of see what the problem is with making it voluntary going on in the States right now, because people are stupid.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, it needs to be said, although I've only really just glanced at this morning. I haven't seen a great deal about it, but President Trump, I believe, has said that he has come down with COVID. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, from what I hear. I mean, don't know if it's true or not. I mean,
yeah.
When you've lied like 29,000 times in the last 2 years, I have a hard time believing anything.
Well, indeed. What did you think of the debate? Sorry, we're veering way off topic here, but what did you think of the debate?
I don't know. It makes me kind of miss those old, like when you read the recollection from the Scopes monkey trial or, Jerry Springer.
Yeah.
I just think it was kind of very disappointing when you looked at how well organized and how well executed a lot of the historical debates with a lot more controversial issues have been handled. Seeing two men in their 70s not being able to shut up and let the other guy speak before making a rebuttal.
Yeah. Well, it was there was certainly some entertainment value there, I guess, but I don't know, man. It was interesting to see what happens as we go forward. But the other thing that I wanted to touch on, right? So this whole thing about degeneracy. It seems to me that there are very strong, like 1930s sort of undertones to the use of that term. And of course, when you look at where the term, I believe, came from, which was out of like places like 4chan, maybe that's not surprising. But I mean, what do you think about that? This marking out of people as sort of undesirables, or I forget the German term for that, but you know what I'm getting at here.
Yeah, you mean Untermensch?
Yes. I mean, that's kind of where they're going, isn't it? That's kind of where they're going with this. They're kind of saying, well, there are these people over here whose behavior is such that it's damaging the fabric of society, and I suppose an extension of that is these people are dangerous and they should be controlled in some way.
Well, my general take on it is just that we used to have this not exactly amazing policy, but we used to have lunatic asylums all over the country, all over the Western world, where people who were crazy were locked up.
Yeah.
Now, in the 60s and 70s, they started to determine that wasn't the ideal way, and that people who are crazy should live in the community and get outpatient treatment. Unfortunately, there is no check if you were a lunatic when you sign up to social media.
Well, that's true. That is true, unfortunately.
It's one of those things I've considered, because I've been doing that specifically for the last 3 weeks. I've been going out of my way to try and follow people who aren't necessarily part of the space we're normally in, because virtually everyone who's in that space is to the right politically to varying degrees. A lot of libertarians, a lot of conservatives. And then you have some people who are more along my lines. I tend to view myself as kind of an Enlightenment liberal.
Right. How would you say that? How does that? How would you? Ahead. Could you say a little bit more on that? How would you say that breaks down?
Well, it's essentially you have the individual and liberty as the central thing. The state and group only exist so far as they guard individual liberty.
Right.
And the state should always try to interfere to the least possible degree to accomplish a goal. Freedom of speech is held very highly. Rationalism and somewhat even scientism is kind of held forth that if you can't prove it scientifically or make a cogent argument as to why it's sensible, then it should be disregarded.
Yeah, I think I could go along with that. I think that's possibly kind of similar to where I am. But I mean, how does that differ, would you say, from libertarianism? Because I wanted to come on to talk about libertarianism in a minute. But would you say that's markedly different? Mm.
No, I wouldn't. But I'd say that the issue with libertarianism is that the term has been co-opted by so many crackpots that I'm not comfortable. It's similar to like, I'm not comfortable calling myself an atheist for two reasons. Number one is obviously that atheist, the position that there is no God, is a position that you can technically prove. So you should be agnostic, leaning atheist. But the other one is that there are so many idiots who have co-opted that term that I don't want to be associated with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can see where you're coming from with that. I mean, the thing is, I often say that I'm libertarian with a small L, and what I mean by that is that I don't mean that I'm in any way, I don't go along with any libertarian political party or anything like that. I just mean that the basic principles of libertarianism, as I understand them, are kind of where I'm at. But like with all of these things, it's work in progress. I mean, I think our views change as we go on, don't they? But I mean, what about this sort of thing about live and let live? Because this is the other thing as well. I mean, like we've had some attacks recently from other people in this. I mean, it's just a Jerry Springer show the whole time. This damn space, isn't it? But we get attacked sometimes, and people will have a pop and they'll try to make slurs and they'll try to sort of like, I don't know, call you degenerate or call you this and call you that. But I mean, my position in general in life has been live and let live. And I know some people will say, well, that's just sitting on the fence or whatever. But like, I don't really, like, to be honest, I'm pretty damn selfish in the main. And what that means is I don't really give a damn what other people do as long as I can get on with my own thing. And my own thing has been, well, I wanted to have the relationships I wanted to have. I wanted to have the sex life I wanted to have. I wanted to make the money. I wanted to make money on my own terms. I wanted to live where I want to live. Like I'm very much individualistic. And so to that extent, what other people do, I don't really care that much. So I don't really care. I mean, there's a lot of homophobia, for example, in this space, but I don't really give a damn about any of that. I just don't care. It doesn't even enter into my reality. It's just like other people can do what the hell they want. In terms of sexuality or whatever, as long as I can just get on and do what I want.
Yeah, I'm similar in that I've joked around that I don't mind if you want to do black tar heroin, but please ask before doing it in my bedroom using one of my spoons.
Exactly. Absolutely.
But it's more about general, like I don't see I have enough things going on in my own life that I need to focus on, and it's to the point where I occasionally forget things I shouldn't.
Yeah.
And I don't have the time nor the inclination to spend a lot of time seeing what other people are doing.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, and this is the thing, right? Because like you were tweeting recently about individualism versus collectivism, and I know this is a big issue for you, as it is for me. And a lot of this seems to come down to you've got dudes on the one hand who are sort of individualists, who are basically saying, "Look, let's just do your own thing, have a great time, party, whatever." Perhaps in a slightly more better couched way, but they're kind of essentially coming from that angle. And then you've got a bunch of other guys on the other side who are saying, no, but that's bad for society. And you've got to act in the interests of society. And it's that whole, what about the children type thing. I mean, do you see that divide as being prevalent now?
Yeah, I see the divide. I just don't necessarily think it's as large of a gap. And I don't necessarily think the two are inherently contradictory. In the sense that you can have fun and do your own thing without ruining the moral fabric of society. Because let's be honest, like, it's not the morals that are keeping us together anymore. It used to be all that stuff back in like the Dark Ages. Then it was like the nationalism and the religion and everything. Now it's more of an interdependence that the guy running the power plant, he can't die because then suddenly you have no electrical power. You need the police force. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of crazy criminals running around. And you can't like underpay your nurses because then they screw up and kill you. And I'm actually a big fan of some of those elements of being in a society that, I think we need the police. I think you actually need some form of socialized healthcare, not because I want to take care of people, but more because if you have public schooling and you spend, like, let's say 16 years of someone's life teaching them stuff, and they die just as they finish without having paid any taxes, that's a huge loss of income there. Imagine if they'd paid taxes for 40 years.
Yeah.
It's kind of to the side of what you're saying. I get where you're coming from with the prosocial versus antisocial, or individualist versus collectivist take on this. But I think it's possible to do both. And for most men, it's to a degree. I don't think the trads are constantly prosocial either. I don't think a guy who was extremely pro-social would be slagging people off on Twitter. I think he'd be out helping his community and building stuff in his community to actually make that better. Yeah, for sure. Although I suppose they'd argue that they are doing that. I suppose they'd say that they are doing that, and and Twitter's just a side thing. But I don't know. I mean, Ryan here, Ryan Christensen is saying, hi Ryan, is saying, is it more of a pro-social versus anti-social approach? But before he said, I thought being degenerate was a compliment. So, I mean, maybe we need to take a step back in terms of how we're discussing this, because I do take degenerate as a compliment, and I do think degeneracy is something that should be celebrated, really, because I think the thing that I've seen, particularly on Twitter, is that you've got so many dudes. It's like the mainstream now, if you like, are dudes going, do the right thing, get married, have a white picket fence. You've got like that is the majority. And then there's just a few people on the other side who are going, well, actually, hang on a minute, fuck that, let's just have a good time. And why should realistic about it? Like, if you're realistic, like, most people aren't going to put in the effort. We're such a minute part of society. So even if, let's say, 100,000 men across the Western world of like 500-600 million people or something were to actually take this to heart and start screwing around, it wouldn't even make a dent.
Yeah, absolutely. And the truth of the matter is that it's never going to happen, is it? Because, like, we already know. I mean, the majority of men, and even the majority, let's be honest, even the majority of men in this space end up with a pretty traditional setup. I mean, Rollo Tomassi famously married for 32 years. Ryan is in a long-term relationship. I mean, even John's got a long-term girlfriend, although, that relationship is maybe slightly unconventional. But you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, and obviously Rich Cooper's in a long-term relationship, and many of the former famous PUAs and people have ended up, being in relationships and settling down and getting married. So the truth of the matter is the majority of guys in the end are going to go down that route. And some bloke with a small YouTube channel and a Twitter feed is not going to change that. I think on a long enough timeline, I think most guys do in the end up sort of settling down.
Well, I think they would too, because like you get to the point where you're like, I can't deal with these hoes anymore.
Yeah.
And exactly. You kind of notice that if you have like heavy game periods, you get to a certain point where you're all hoed out and you just want to sit down and play some kind of video game or watch something on TV and just relax. You just can't be bothered with it. And then you have to reload. And then a while later, then it's like, okay, I could do with some more hoes now. And it's just it's kind of the same as eating or drinking something. When you've had a ton of it, you kind of get tired of it and you need to do something else. So I don't think it's a huge risk for society if some people need to have fun. I think what's kind of grinding the gears of the trad guys is they have Instagram and OnlyFans too.
Right. So, well, I mean, the other thing about some of those guys is, do you think that it is some of this is driven by jealousy, really? Not of jealousy of me as an individual or whatever, but just this general jealousy that there's a load of people out there who, or potentially there are people out there who are having a good time, who aren't following the rules. And they've followed all the rules because they've either just fallen into it or they felt that they had to. And they're kind of resentful about that.
Yeah, obviously that's going to be a factor. And you're also going to have the guys who found the red pill after they got married.
Yeah.
And who are in a situation where they can't really change it, and they kind of need other guys to join them in, not necessarily misery, but in the same situation to have cool friends.
And validating their choices.
Yeah, in that few words. They needed that validation and that idea that I didn't completely fuck my life up by getting married. And quite frankly, I don't think it depends entirely. I wouldn't recommend it unless you have a certain level of experience. And even then, it's somewhat sketchy because you need to bring in lawyers, you have to have assets, you have to have prenups set up. And if you can cohabitate, you can get pretty much the same thing as you would in a marriage without taking the legal risk of it.
Well, would without, you could share as much or as little as you want, but I mean, could you ever see yourself getting legally married? I mean, what's the future for you, do you think? Or have you thought it out that far yet?
I haven't really thought it out, and I've become, as I've gotten older, more and more careful, planning more than about 24 to 36 months ahead.
Really? So what? So you wouldn't plan much further ahead than that, you mean?
No, just in general, I don't see it in the cards in the next 2 to 3 years.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I'm not sure. Like, it's such a dumb thing to say, like, I'm never going to, or I would never, because you may end up in a situation where you end up doing it. But for the most part, I just don't think much about it. And I think that's kind of a better thing. Like, the guys who are like women in the sense they've been planning to get married and have kids since they were 12.
Yeah.
They make themselves very vulnerable.
Well, I've always found that slightly odd in a way, because it seems to me, and I mean, this is not politically correct, but obviously we're not on a woke show here, but I mean, it's always seemed to be quite feminine to think in that way. And I'm surprised how many guys do seem to think that way. They're like, oh my God, I've always dreamed of like a house and a family and blah, blah, blah. And I'm a bit like, really? I spent most of my life dreaming of how to get out of that. To be of how to, because for so much of my life I was having such a good time, basically out and about, meeting these different girls, etc., etc. The problem was almost became the opposite in a way. It was like, well, how do I not get bogged down in this relationship or in this situation or in this domestic setup that I found myself in? How do I escape? Do you know what I mean? And even when I was a kid, and this again, this is partly down to my family history and all that stuff. Because like my parents divorced when I was young, and then my dad remarried, and I had a fairly rough time with my stepmother, and so did my sister. I mean, there's a lot of like family stuff that happened. So I never had that sort of like Pollyanna-ish view of marriage and relationships and things anyway, even when I was a kid. So it was never something I was champing at the bit to do. And I think as an adult, when you obviously you have friends who get married, and then those marriages end and things go wrong, and you sort of think, well, you could do all of that stuff that they tell you you're meant to do, but actually, you could be a dude in his 40s having a pretty damn good time. Why not just kind of do that instead? Do you know what I mean?
Well, I just think it comes down to kind of what you want to do with it. Like, for me, the main priority in my life has always been financial, in a sense.
Yeah.
So for me, it's always been, it's a mix of it's curiosity and cash. Those have always been my main two drivers.
So making sure you're okay financially, you mean, or making sure you hit certain financial goals.
Yeah, like I want to get to the point where I have at least 2 shell corporations in the Cayman Islands.
Right.
And that's always been like my main mission. And I enjoyed that part of things. And that's why I still work corporate, even though I could work for myself now, is because you get to run like $100 million projects. Yes. Which you probably never get to do outside of the military, government, or corporate. So, and I just love that challenge. But the reason I got involved with the Manosphere in the first place was I was so focused on that shit that when I was in my early 20s, I was like, oh shit, like, okay, girls were actually hot and I would like to have sex at some point.
It might be nice. I'd like to have sex at some point.
And you have to do that catch-up game. That's why I always tell guys that they kind of end up behind. And I think a lot of the people who call other guys degenerate are doing it because they can't quite fathom making that leap and actually teaching themselves and facing all that rejection.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think we will likely start to turn this around to talking about, you know, the need to do the work, because I don't think doing the work, both in terms of your game and your dating skills, but also in terms of, you know, other aspects of your life, I don't think that's necessarily compatible with this idea of, you know, like I say, I mean, like I said earlier, enjoying the sensual. Do you know what I mean? Like and I think there's a sort of, is it Catholic or is it a Catholic thing or almost a Protestant, like, work ethic-y type thing? But I think there's a guilt, isn't there? There's an inherent guilt in people. Like, it's always been seen as very wrong to be somebody who says, well, I just want to have sex, and I just want to drink, and I just want to party, and I just want to do drugs. And I think those things are really important, and that's how I want to live my life. Like for most of recorded history, if you said those kinds of things, people would look down on you because they would say, well, you're not doing the right thing, you're not applying yourself, you're not working. But my question has always been, but why? Like, where did that come from, this imperative that you have to live your life in a certain way? Like, if I wanted to just go and live on a beach in Ibiza and just smoke weed for the rest of my life and, you know, have casual sex, why would that be such a bad thing?
I just think that comes down to, I think it's Christianity for the most, or like the Abrahamic religions, let's be fair. Because if you look at, one of the most interesting things I've seen is look at the United States of America versus South America, right?
Yeah.
In like the 1600s, if you had to guess which of those societies would become like a world power, you would have guessed South America. They had an established infrastructure. They had huge cities. They had like usually cohesive peoples. But it turned out to be America. And I think the main thing there was a lot of the people who emigrated to America were Protestants, and they had that Protestant work ethic. Because minimalism and a hard work ethic and, you know, toil in the soil and whatever has always been a huge part of Protestantism. And I think that's kind of stuck with a lot of people, in that they're kind of stuck in that, you know, if they're kind of caught between their guilt and their desires, and their desires magnify their guilt. Yeah,
that's an interesting point. That is an interesting point. I mean, there's a great novel actually that I read by it's called Arabor, Against Nature, by a guy called Huysmans. Who was a French writer in the 19th century. And this particular book was a big influence on Oscar Wilde. So if you read Picture of Dorian Gray, he refers to this book because it was a very, very shocking novel when it came out, and everyone thought it was really depraved and degenerate in you know, England and everything. But basically, this novel describes this dude, this French guy, who gets tired of basically other people and life, really, and he goes and self-isolates in a chateau somewhere, and he just indulges all of his most sensual desires, basically. So he buys these amazing perfumes, he has all these crazy sex experiences, he buys a giant tortoise and puts jewels on its back that weigh the tortoise down so much that it dies, and blah blah blah. And there's all of this kind of like it's like this idea of just exploring sensuality to the greatest extent possible, you know, and why not do that? And he kind of comes a cropper at the end, as you would imagine. But I believe that the author of that actually, in the end, before his death, went and converted, or rather, I think he was Catholic anyway, but he confirmed his Catholicism before he died, you know, because there is this sort of like, I guess, I don't know. It's just the inherent human guilt, isn't there? Where it's sort of like you can go and indulge yourself for so long, but then often there's this, and we've seen this even in the Sphere, haven't we, with Rouge or people like that? You know, there's this sort of like you go and enjoy the earthly pleasures for a period of time, and then it's like, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that. Now I need to atone for it somehow, and I need to wear sackcloth and ashes. But my question has always been, well, why bother to wear the sackcloth and ashes? Why bother to grow the beard and go and live in Montana? Why not just enjoy the party until you die? You know, do a Hugh Hefner.
I don't think it's going to be satisfying for most people for that long, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I think at some point like if you're like Hefner in your 70s and you're popping Viagra like candy, and you more or less have to lay on the bed and have a girl come and sit on you, and what kind of enjoyment are you actually getting out of that? Because there is something to be said for like the Jim Morrison approach to life, which is like do drugs, drink, smoke, fuck, and then die when you're 28.
Yes.
And then there's the approach to life. Well, eat bran muffins, take your vitamins, drink cod liver oil, and get a lot of fresh air and sun, and live until you're 140. Like, my approach has always been like, I just don't want to be the last person who dies. That would really suck, being the last dude who dies right before they invent something that makes sure no one ever dies again.
Yeah, which they might end up developing. I mean, I think there's work going on in that direction, isn't there? And I mean, God knows what that would mean for human existence. I mean, imagine being alive forever. Imagine having to be in a Twitter battle with Anthony Dream Johnson for eternity.
Well, I do think they actually got that. I'm not sure if you ever watched the TV show True Blood.
I didn't actually know. No, I was.
There was a character. Yeah, there was a character on there who'd lived for, I think, 1,200 years.
Right.
And in the end, he was so tired of life, he voluntarily committed suicide just because he didn't want to live anymore. And I think you can kind of get tired of life if you've seen it all. Because to me, like, life is about new experiences, new challenges, and if you're not getting any of those, if you've done everything, what is there to look forward to? Because nothing is ever as good as the first time you did it. Yeah,
definitely. I remember the first time I posted a George Bruno joke on Twitter, and the high that I got from that was incredible. And then after that, it's just never quite been the same. But people are... And you touched on this. People are sort of saying, I've noticed that hedonism and sensuality and degeneracy is delicious. Oh, this is Ryan Christensen again. There's a tendency for that to get boring after a while. So not atoning, but moving on. And like you said as well, I mean, if you are actually Hugh Hefner and you're in your 70s and, you need, 300 milligrams of Viagra to get it up with a, 23-year-old, stripper, then... is that really where you want to go? But here's how I would like modify the point, because like on social media and stuff, I'm joking around a lot, talking about degeneracy, and like, I mean, I did this post the other day which annoyed some people, where I was saying, well, look at Trump. I mean, he's got Melania, but surely he could get like some decent, younger, fitter, hotter, MAGA, companions. Why doesn't he do that? And these guys were coming back going, well, because he's got family values, and like, he's 73, surely he should be allowed to give up. And I was sort of saying, no, he's thrown in the towel. He should be a player for life. He's meant to be this big alpha, and he's got Melania, but she's a bit craggy now. Why doesn't he, get something, trade her in? But I was sort of joking, because the truth of the matter is, yes, of course, you get to a point where, sex and the desire, all of that stuff, it does lessen. The white hot heat of male desire does start to dim a little bit. But there are other things. Now, at the moment, I'm reading all of Shakespeare. So I just decided, it was kind of a New Year's resolution. I just thought, look, I'm British. I should just at least read all of one of our greatest writers. So I just decided I was gonna, and I've read obviously, quite a lot of the plays already, because you do them at school and things. But I thought, right, I'm just going to read all of the ones that I haven't read, and the poetry as well. So I'm going to read things like Timon of Athens and Pericles and Cymbeline and all these ones that don't get read very much. And so I'm working through it at the moment, and it's fantastic. Like, I'm really enjoying it. The sensuality of the language, the amazing stories and everything like that. So a sensual pleasure is not necessarily just being at the club and like trying to, get with the 23-year-old cam girl.
No, and I think a lot of people move in that direction. Like, I've joked on occasion that I kind of wish I could go back to being like 12 before you hit puberty, with all that focus you had back then before you started thinking about sex.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Then on the other hand, like you say, there are a lot of hedonistic pleasure that doesn't necessarily involve Japanese rope bondage in an 18-year-old.
Yeah, which is, sad to say it, but that's absolutely true. And I think, like, again, degeneracy is a term that, I didn't invent. I mean, this is a term that's been applied to me, and you see thrown around. So I'm kind of using it in a semi-ironic way. But I mean, like in terms of hedonism, for example, and hedonism, they hate hedonism as well, don't they? They hate the term hedonism. It's like, oh, these hedonists, you know, it's like a sort of a, oh, what's that right-wing pundit called? Ben Shapiro kind of thing, you know, are these hedonists, they're ruining Western society and stuff. And I just find all that so bloody dull.
Well, I do think that comes from, sorry for cutting you off. I think that comes from, if you look at the three things they tend to say, degenerate, hedonist, and nihilist.
Yes,
and
that's
the
true.
fact that they tend to use those three terms kind of signals what their problem is. They're missing a sense of spirituality. Their focus is on that. They want to be the monk on his knees inside the church until his knees bleed when he gets a spiritual enlightenment. And some of us are more along the lines of you get small spiritual enlightenments when you engage in sensual stimulation. It's like if you read up on Dionysus, especially like Nietzsche had one, Birthplace of Tragedy. It's like one of his early books when he writes about the Greek theater, I believe it is, and he goes through kind of the Apollonian side of things and the Dionysian side. And I think a lot of these guys are heavy into Apollo, like it's duty, morals, virtue, those kind of untangibles, versus Dionysus, which is more wine and fucking, basically.
Yes. Which book was that? Which Nietzsche book is that?
Birthplace of Tragedy.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah. I'm going to do a load of Nietzsche next. Actually, I've read some Nietzsche, but I haven't read all. So I'm going to try and do a deep dive into Nietzsche.
I wouldn't recommend that. You'll be here talking about Jung in 6 months, man.
Well, I quite like Jung, actually. I mean, Jung gets a bad name, but I quite like some of Jung. I mean, there's a really good bit in Jung, actually, where he talks about, it's effectively like a journey of self-discovery, and he talks about the importance of, it's almost a bit like nowadays in bro culture, we say finding your mission, but he talks about the importance of that and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I quite like some of that. I mean, I obviously don't go down the full Jordan Peterson route with it, but yeah, I mean, I think, like, in a sense, you know, my position has always been nihilism is an interesting word, isn't it? And that is probably something that we should consider, because people have called me nihilistic before, and I suppose in some ways I kind of am, in the sense that I don't believe that there is any overarching meaning to human existence. You know, I don't really believe in, I mean, Rich Cooper said this the other day, actually. I don't really believe in an afterlife. I mean, if there is one, great, you know, happy to take the extra time, but it's not something that I'm really anticipating. So my view has always been, you know, we're here for a very finite amount of time, and then we die, and it's all a bit meaningless, really. And legacy is, who cares about legacy? Because once you're dead, you're not going to be conscious of your legacy. So, you know, sod that. So why not have a good time while you're here? Now, when I say a good time, that doesn't necessarily mean you're at the Cancun pool party until you're 80. But why not enjoy the sensual side of things to the greatest degree that you can? Since what other purpose is there, you know? I mean, is that nihilistic, would you say?
Well, I'm not even sure if it's just the sensual side. I think it's this idea that they have that anything that's enjoyable that isn't also, quote unquote, the right thing to do is wasteful. Yeah. It's pointless excess.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
For me, it was always more like, you can like Nietzsche for me was, the whole point of Nietzsche is to say that, okay, if there is no God and God is dead, then humans have to find the own purpose in their existence. But purpose is very, very individualistic. No one else can tell you what your purpose is. You have to kind of figure that out for yourself through trial and error. And then you end up with the problem that they look externally for that. So you get the Bible, you get like the trad life, you get the Norman Rockwell paintings. And that looks very nice if you're looking at, like, yeah, Norman Rockwell is just a family having dinner around a fireplace, and you don't get the realistic picture. That's why I think a lot of people would love to have like a real life Matrix or Westworld type thing where they could just go and LARP in whatever time period they'd like the most with a robot to fuck.
Yeah, that would be pretty. I'd sign up for that, to be honest. What about this idea about spirituality then? Because that's a fair point, isn't it? You know, like what you're saying, what they are perhaps critical of in terms of maybe my position would be, well, where's the spirituality in that? And then, of course, if we are sort of agnostic, which I am, and probably leading towards atheist, then where does that leave you, really? Now, actually, I believe that I do have a spiritual component in my life, but do they have a fair point about that? I mean, perhaps there is something rather empty if you are just, you know, doing all of this kind of, you know, degenerate stuff, and you're not like feeding the soul in some way.
Well, I don't believe in souls so much, but I think there are things that transcend the pure sensual or hedonistic aspect of those acts. Let's say if you're having sex with a beautiful woman, or if you're eating a meal prepared by a fantastic chef, if you're reading a book by an amazing author, if you hear a fantastic piece of music, there's something about that transcends just the sound waves, or just the way your tongue reacts to the chemicals, or just the dopamine rush in your head.
Yeah, I think that's true. And there's a great G.K. Chesterton line, actually, where it's been attributed to him. I don't know if it was actually him that wrote it or said it, but every time a man knocks on the door of a brothel, he's looking for God. Which you'd have to be very drunk to make that mistake. But I think the point of it is that in seeking for that sensual pleasure, the protagonist, or the guy or whatever, is in fact, he's embarking on a spiritual search. And I've always regarded, I mean, you know, like I spent a long time drinking a ton of alcohol and doing drugs and, you know, whatever. And in a way, I think that could be regarded as a spiritual search. I mean, it's not a very effective way of doing it, but it is, you are engaged on the same path that other people are engaged on when they're maybe going to a Buddhist meditation center, or, you know, doing whatever they're doing.
I always like the idea that, I can't remember the Christopher Hitchins quote from memory, I think, but alcohol makes people less boring, and it can give you what the Greeks used to call ethos, the inherent beauty in things. Gives you access to that while reading or engaging in something else. And I'm a big fan of altered states for that reason. Like, you have a ton of history. Like, you have ayahuasca in South America, you have peyote among the Indians, you have probably a lot of magic mushrooms for various tribes. And I think those were there for a reason. Now, I wouldn't advocate anyone doing it, but they were part of our culture for a long time. It's only with Christianity you got this. And, well, the Abrahamic religions in general are just made for dullards.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned that, actually, because like my brush with spirituality has been through alcohol recovery, if you like, because if you go into 12-step programs, maybe people know something about this, but you go into 12-step programs, and what they basically say is, and in fact, actually, Carl Jung of all people was involved with this. He said Carl Jung tried to treat an alcoholic patient, and he wasn't able to treat the patient. And he said the only thing that's going to cure this dude, he didn't say dude, but you know what I mean, is this guy needs to have some form of spiritual experience in order to sort of bring him out of his addiction to alcohol. So the 12-step programs, basically, for drugs and alcohol and, you know, whatever, sex, that, you know, whatever it is, they encourage you to have some kind of spiritual experience, or like this belief in a higher power and all of these things. And that causes people a lot of problems, because there's a lot of actually Irish Catholics in who go to those groups in London, and some of those have problems with it because they don't like Catholicism anymore. Some of them are totally on board with it because they're paid up Catholics and they're just like, yeah, I've got my faith. But there are other people who are atheists and they have to find another way around, some sort of like higher power or some sort of spirituality. So through that, because I engaged in all of that stuff, I had to find some kind of spirituality, which is always work in progress. I mean, it's never like fully defined or whatever, but I had to sort of address my spiritual side through that. But these days there are people, and I was talking to a friend recently. I met up with a friend for dinner who was engaged, who used to go to those groups and do all of that stuff. And now he's got into mushrooms and he's gone into ayahuasca. And I don't know that I fully, how I feel about that particularly, but what he was saying to me was, look, I started to do mushrooms, with a therapist there, and started to do ayahuasca in a sort of controlled way, because that shortcuts the spiritual side of things. That gets me to that spirituality quicker than if you're going to sit in a church and meditate or whatever. In order to try to get to that spiritual place. So, and I mean, he is like fully on board with all of the, there's loads of research apparently now about ayahuasca and, all of these different things. So there is a growing school of thought around all that stuff, isn't there? That actually those hallucinogenic substances are valuable for people.
Well, I think any kind of, to speak to alcohol, because that's the most commonly used one. Yeah. I think the benefit of alcohol is that it alleviates repression.
Yeah.
And I think especially people from maybe not so much America, but at least like if you go through like northern Western Europe, like Germany, you have the Nordics, you have England to a degree, people are very fucking uptight.
True.
And I think that's why you get those club trains outside the clubs in Newcastle, for instance, because they've all been uptight all fucking week, and suddenly they have 6 pints of cider in them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that helps kind of shortcut that aspect of things. And I think that's actually good for a lot of people because they can finally relax when they've had a couple of drinks. On the other hand, it can also become a crutch if you're having a couple of drinks after work every single day. Then you should probably try to find a different outlet. But one of the more interesting things is I know a couple of guys who are ex-drug addicts.
Okay.
And now they're addicted to working out.
Yeah, well, that is very true. That is very true.
So I think it's more of that addictive personality, and you just kind of got hooked on the wrong thing, because no one would call Warren Buffett a money addict. But dude has had fuck you money since the 60s, and he's still working at 90 years old.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I mean, like, an addictive personality is a double-edged sword. It can be very damaging and it can be very useful, But I mean, like, what was interesting with me was I was, I was drinking very heavily, and I got into a bad state with it and everything like that. And then I stopped. But what happened almost overnight? I mean, I was going out and to clubs and I was meeting girls and things anyway. This was in Manchester. But almost as soon as I put the drink down, I was just on the energy drinks, and I was going, and then I was going out more, and I was saying to I had a friend who was, still drinks and whatever, but I was like to him, right, come on, it's Tuesday night, we've got to go out, like every night of the week we were going out, and I was basically hitting on every girl in the club, because when I'd tamped down, I'd sort of put down the alcohol, but then it was like it came up, that sort of compulsion came up again in a different area, and it came up for me in like sex and wanting to get laid, basically. So it's kind of interesting how that happens, because you're right. You push it down in one area and then it comes up again in another place.
Yeah, it's. I think I put this out on Twitter a while back that the sum of your vices is a constant.
That's interesting. But like you say, I mean, sometimes it can be positive as well, because if you've got that sort of compulsive, like, personality, and you put that towards building a business or writing a novel, or I don't know, learning to play the violin or something, then that is a really positive outlet for it. So it's not always a bad thing, but it is something that I think can destroy you if you allow it to go in the wrong direction.
But I do think the benefit of those experiences and of quote unquote degeneracy in general is that if you have a breadth of experience, then you can easily say what you don't want from life. Because I think that's kind of the issue. A lot of the guys, especially the ones who kind of settled down early, they never really had a choice in designing their own life. They just kind of fell into it, and whatever they had at that point, because when you're in a relationship, you change less. Would be my argument. You're not going to have as many and as crazy experiences as you would normally have just because there's another person there.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Absolutely. Listen, guys, if you've got any questions about this or about anything else, really, about dating, game, etc., whack them in the chat because we can get to them. We've been on for about an hour now, so I'm not sure how much longer Cole's got. But if you do have any questions, then put them into the chat, either about degeneracy or just how to score top tier ladies in the contemporary dating marketplace. I mean, the thing about you, Cole, is that you are, on the one hand, a very cerebral guy and obviously an accomplished writer and everything, but you're also kind of a horn dog as well, aren't you? I mean, your dating life has been pretty prolific over the years. I mean, what's happening at the moment? Are you? I know that you were, a big exponent of the apps and things. I mean, where are you at the moment with it?
With what?
Like dating
the
and
apps?
games and stuff
I kind of got off those a while back. I kind of burned out. So right now I've only been seeing one girl for a while. I mean, for the most part, I view it as part of my social distancing not to deal with that many hoes.
That's true, because I mean, like the people the players have to be like some of the worst possible, like super spreaders, really, right? I mean, and I guess the hoes are like super spreaders, but just they're spreading their legs.
Well, hosts are even worse, I think, because the players will occasionally... Well, it depends, because the hosts aren't going to hit that as many targets. Like, if you're doing day game, I can see like 50 approaches easily in like an 8-hour window.
Yeah. Yeah.
And 50 approaches, if you're kind of closing the gap... that would actually be interesting to see, though, what effect like social distancing has had on Kino.
That's interesting. Well, I've been out with a few clients recently, and it's interesting in London because you've got a very sort of polarized... I think a lot of people in London, particularly a lot of people in the sort of age group that we are dealing with, which tends to be people in their 20s and maybe early 30s, but predominantly 20s. I think a lot of those people are not that bothered, really, about the virus and potentially catching the virus and all that kind of thing. So for the most part, approaches to those people haven't been problematic, and Kino's been fine. But obviously get out of then there are some people who are very, very appear to be very concerned, and they're wearing a mask and they're whatever, and so, but I don't think I mean, I suppose it depends where you are and what the temperature's like in that particular location. I mean, in London, they're putting in more restrictions again and all this kind of thing, but to be honest, like most people seem, it doesn't seem that bad. I mean, what about where you are? Do you think, are people overly concerned?
I think they're slowly getting like COVID. They're getting very tired of all the restrictions. So I think a lot of people are starting to kind of skate them or skip them altogether. And that means they're going to have to roll out law enforcement and everything else to kind of enforce them, which I think is unfortunate, because so far, for the most part, things have been like voluntary plus.
Yes.
Now I think they're moving towards involuntary minus, and that it's not like full, we're going to kick the shit out of you and fine you if you don't. It's more like don't.
Yeah.
So I think that's unfortunate, but it could be worse. I mean, we could be in a state of Spain, Italy, or America.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know what's going to happen in the UK, really. I mean, they put in further restrictions. It seems like the R number's still going up. So, I mean, in big parts of the country, they're saying that households can't mix. And I guess that kind of makes day game illegal, really, or probably any kind of game, really.
We have to keep in mind, though, if you look at it this way, it should give guys some time to reflect. And I'm just happy gyms are open.
Oh, mate, 100%, 100%. Well, that's what I was saying right at the beginning of the whole thing. I was saying to guys, and actually, what a lot of people were saying to their respective audiences, like now is the time to spend a bit of time working on yourself and, reflecting and thinking about what you want and all of that kind of stuff. And I did that all the way through the initial lockdown, but then it's still going on, and we're coming into we're in the fourth quarter, and you're just like, oh, for God's sake, it does get a little bit dull at the moment. But like you say, I mean, gyms are open here. Hopefully they'll remain open. That is hugely better than it was back in April, May,
Yeah, as long as you have like the basic services, this is a great time to go monk mode.
Yeah, true. That's very true.
It's a great time to actually focus on other things than game.
Yeah.
And you can it's also a good moment to actually work on your like online /text /dating gap aim. Because a lot of girls are inside, they're bored, and they're on all these apps. So this is a good time to get your practice up on sliding into DMs.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're right. It is a good time, definitely for the online stuff. It's like, it's through the roof really in terms of, opportunities. Truth Maximus says, this has been the week of flakes for me. 2 back-to-back. What's the best way to mitigate? I did a video about flakes yesterday, actually. Have you got any thoughts on that? On flaking?
I was watching last week's Rule Zero, and Myron was talking about double stacking dates. I used to triple and quad stack them.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Of course, for some reason, when I started doing that, suddenly my flake rate went down like crazy. So suddenly I was pulling off like 3-4 dates a day.
Yeah.
I think that's a good one. I think that you have to look at, because the higher your initial investment, the less likely the flake. So the more she invests into the interaction when you're first meeting her and setting up the date, the lower her flake rate is probably going to be if she actually accepts the date, and she's not one of those girls who are going to stand there talking to you for 30 minutes while you're running day game. And then when you ask her, I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm married. I was just enjoying the attention.
Right. Yeah. So what are you saying? Like, they should gauge it by how they respond during the initial approach, if she's likely to flake or not.
No, but more along the lines, like if you bounce her to like an Insta coffee date, and then you're like, okay, let me get your number and I'll hit you up. That girl is less likely to flake than a girl you had a 2-minute conversation with, a number closed outside, a news agents.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Although, Paul Janker's attitude to this used to be the opposite, really, in the sense that he would, and let's remember, he was incredibly good-looking, tall, Harvard-educated, athletic build, blah blah blah. So, pretty much a male. He's pretty much the Giga Chad that those Black Pill guys go on about. But nevertheless, his attitude to this was keep the interaction short when you're getting the number, because if you last it out for too long, then you can almost inadvertently friend zone yourself in a way, because if it gets too chummy over the coffee, you sort of like take your mystery away, and she's like a bit like, oh yeah, okay, actually I'm not feeling that as much. Whereas if you're just straight in, straight out, you've got that kind of man of mystery air about you, and sometimes that can play well. But I agree with you that it's a slightly riskier strategy, I suppose.
Well, I think both can work. It's not necessarily about how the duration of the interaction so much as how much she invests into the interaction. Right.
Yeah. So her investment is the key thing.
Yeah. Not yours. Like if you're the hottest guy she's met all week, she's less likely to flake than if you're the 18th bozo in black shoes, black pants, black leather jacket, usually burgundy or purple shirt RSD clone.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I've also recently developed an idea that I think it's also about the intensity of the emotions that you make her feel on the interaction, because I always tell the story. I mean, because I've done day game approaches where I've been chatting to the girl for 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and you think, oh my God, this is amazing. And then you never hear from her again. right? But by the same token, I've also done very quick approaches where it's been literally straight in, straight out, and I've got a phone number, and then she's, we've ended up dating. And it happened one time with this Russian girl that I approached in London at High Street Kensington Station, actually. Very, very attractive blonde girl. She was wearing a little black dress and kind of heeled shoes like Russian girls do, even though it was the middle of the daytime. And I saw her and I thought, she's really very attractive. And I thought, to be honest, I think I'm punching above my weight a little bit here. But I thought, right, I'm just going to go in and try the approach anyway. So I went up and introduced myself. I said she looked nice and I wanted to come and, say hello. And she's like, oh, yes, I'm going to the airport. Can't do the accent. But she told me she was going to the airport. And she basically, she literally had no time. And I said, okay, fine. Well, let's exchange numbers and I'll drop you a message. And maybe when you get back from Moscow, because that's where she was going, we can meet for drinks. And she gave me her number. And I walked off and absolutely convinced that I would never see her again because, it was such a short interaction. She was very, very attractive and there was almost no sort of value exchange at all, really. But I messaged her and then she messaged me back later when she'd arrived in Moscow and we were chatting back and forwards when she was there. And then when she came back to London, we met up for drinks, and you know what? We started dating as a result of that. And that was literally like a 2-minute interaction. Very, very quick. Whereas I've had these longer interactions where somehow the energy can fizzle out of it. Do you know what I mean?
No, I completely agree. It's it's kind of difficult because my record, including time spent chatting in the app, my record for swiping, hitting a girl up on the app, and taking her home and sleeping with her was, I think, 37 minutes.
Wow. Fantastic.
And at that point, no, that wasn't because of my game. That wasn't because of anything I did. That girl was DTF right away. She just wanted dick that night.
Yes.
Any dick would do as long as you hit that. You have to be this tall for me to ride you thing.
Right. Yeah. yeah. But there again, you see, I mean, those opportunities do come up. I mean, they don't come up necessarily all the time, but they do come up. But you've got to be in it to win it, haven't you? Which is why we always say, you need to be out there. I mean, John MLD always says, you always be sourcing, always be closing.
You have to be always out there. And you have to be kind of, because I don't think I could have done that now, because there are a lot of subtle signs you pick up on that lead you to think, okay, I'm just going to escalate this fast as fuck regardless and see what happens.
Yeah.
And you don't do that always. You just kind of, it comes to you on occasion. I should really going hard now. Kuko-san in chat, just 1 second here. Don't ask for her number. If she's under 40, don't ask for her number. Get her Instagram or her Snapchat or something. At least I found that girls are kind of weirded out when you ask for their number, especially young ones. That could be cultural, though.
That's interesting. I mean, I suppose that's one of those things that is maybe debated over a bit. I mean, that it used to be the case before social media was such a big deal that you would always try for the number, and social media was a poor second, if you like.
Yeah.
And I still kind of, I mean, in a way, getting her number so that, because a lot of people are on WhatsApp. I don't know, in this country, and perhaps where you are as well, a lot of people use WhatsApp. So it's kind of nice to get the number because then you can get her on WhatsApp, and that's a very direct sort of form of communication. But having said that, the old idea that, just getting a social media ad is not productive is clearly nonsense, because I've many times got Instagram and it's easier that there's less they want to give out their Instagram. They're not bothered so much about giving their Instagram. They can kind of see you a little bit in terms of you can do a little bit of social proof through Instagram, and you can message them and you can set up dates on Instagram. It's like if she wants to continue it with her, then Instagram is as good as a telephone number, right? It's as good as WhatsApp, because you can message and she can respond. If she doesn't respond, she probably didn't want to get to know you anyway.
Yeah, and how soon to text? That's an interesting ad. What's your take on that?
Well, I did a video on this yesterday, actually, and my personal view is I mean, I text pretty much immediately, to be honest. I mean, almost sometimes within an hour. I mean, you know, almost walking off, just like, but maybe within an hour, within a couple of hours, and just like, oh, it's cute, cool meeting you. You know, even though you're a little bit weird, you know, did you manage to escape the shops, or just something kind of cheeky, a little bit of callback humor. Just to try and get the ball rolling. I mean, that's what I've always tended to do. But I don't know. Do you differ from that? Do you leave it for a bit?
I've experimented with all kinds of things there, going anything from like 3 minutes to 3 days.
Wow. And what have you found? Is there any conclusion?
Not really. It's kind of like with everything here. I kind of feel like it's a lot of hit and miss, and it depends a lot of the vibe you're getting from the girl. Like some girls... I've messaged instantly and it fizzled out after a few messages back and forth. Other girls I've messaged after 3 days, and then that's just been on fire. But other times I've gotten messages like, yeah, I was kind of keen on you when I first met you, but now that it's been 3 days, well, fuck it.
I think on balance, my sense of it, and this is just a gut instinct rather than empirical, but again, as John says, time kills all deals. And I do kind of feel like the longer you leave it in this day and age, when her phone's pinging every 20 seconds and et cetera, the longer you leave it, the more in danger you are of just kind of getting forgotten about because a shiny, bright other object has appeared, or, you know, whatever. And I just think the instant... Yeah, carry on.
No, within 24 hours would be my first bet.
Yeah.
Just on the basis that you're still fresh in memory. The odds of like a couple of other guys showing up and approaching her is lessened.
Yeah.
And probably try and time it when you have a gut feeling that she's going to be kind of alone and bored.
Yeah, good one. Good point. Yeah.
So like I would generally avoid like texting a girl between like... Well, that kind of depends too, but generally after 6 on Friday, Saturday... Like, or between like 6 and midnight. Because if you text her, then you're kind of indicating that either you're so unsocially astute that you thought she would be like, yeah, I'm just bored and I'm alone. Girls are never going to be willing to admit, yeah, I'm just sitting at home on a Friday night at 9 o'clock in my pajamas, eating ice cream and watching a sappy movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you text her at like 1 o'clock in the morning, then she has like the legit excuse. Yeah, you know, I was just out with the girls, just got home, and you can kind of try and wing something off that. So there's just, and during work, I find it's a good one. If you know, like roughly, if she's a normal office worker, most people are bored at work and they're checking Facebook anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good one. When you're saying that, do you do much sort of like daytime approach as well as the apps? Or maybe not now, but I mean when you're under normal circumstances, would you do the odd sort of daytime approach, day game approach, or
I did quite a lot of them just on the basis that I think you need a certain level of proficiency in every area of game, because even if you do primarily, like my last bit was mostly app-based because of data and curiosity, but whenever you do an app thing, you're always going to have to parlay that either into like a coffee date, and that's more day game areas, or you're going to have to parlay that into having drinks or something in the evening.
Yes.
So keeping those two in mind, you kind of need at least, you know, a solid footing in either day game or night game. And I think even day game will always tend to move towards night game before the close, just because you're not going to take someone from, well, you could, but it's not going to be often you take someone from a lunch date at 1 o'clock for coffee and straight home to sleep with them. Exactly. On the first point, completely. And I think this is why I always say guys should do cold approach, even if they end up getting the majority of their successes from dating apps, because ultimately you're still going to have to sit there in front of the girl and socialize with her. Even if, you know, you meet her on Tinder and you get into a situation where you're saying just, come over at 8 and, you know, bring the movies sort of thing. And, you know, it's going to be like a same night lay sort of thing. There's still going to be a moment when she's there, you guys meet, and you're going to have to sit in front of her and you're going to have to come across
in an attractive way. And the more experience you've got of interacting with women, interacting with people generally, but specifically interacting with women, the better you're going to come across in those social situations. And that's really what I teach in CAD Academy, to be honest. It's this idea of in real life interactions, because it's very easy just to sit there on your app on the toilet, kind of swiping and, but you're always going to have to meet her. And more often than not, she isn't going to come straight to your place, and you're going to have to meet her for a date, which is either going to be in a wine bar or a cafe or whatever. And you're going to have to come across in a compelling manner. Otherwise, you could lose the deal, right?
Yeah, so if you're going to get laid, you want to get laid in real life, so you're going to have that real life interaction. I think one of the issues some guys run into with dating apps is they get very good at that profile design, swipe, message aspect of things.
Yes.
But there's a huge gap between how good they are in text and how good they are in real life.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I would rather be horrible in text and good in real life than great in text and horrible in real life.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, in the end, you're not going to get around that face-to-face person, in real life, person-to-person interaction thing. So you've got to be on board with that. And I mean, I've done tons and tons and tons of day game in my time over many years, and all of those experiences, and a lot of those experiences, a lot of those interactions came to nothing. There's a lot of attrition in day game for sure, but none of it's wasted, because it's meant that my approach anxiety is now, I mean, it's not zero, but it's significantly reduced to a very, very manageable level. And also, just generally socially, when I sit down over coffee or at a bar with a girl and I'm interacting with her, it's not an issue for me. I can maintain good eye contact. I can come across in a very calibrated way, etc., etc. And all of that is through the school of hard knocks of having been out and done a load of cold approaches that haven't necessarily gone as well. So it's like muscle memory, isn't it?
I think so too, but at the same time, you have to keep in mind that girls are constantly developing in a sense. So that's why I thought the number thing is so funny, because back when I started doing game, the number was like the holy grail.
Yeah.
Get that number close. And then when I did that, like that social media stint, like it was that late last year, the year before, I think. Then at that point, even just trying to number close a girl, they'd look at you kind of strange, and they'd give me the number. And then it was like, talking to them afterwards, it was like, yeah, it was kind of weird when you asked me for my number instead of my Snap or my Insta or something.
So you would always say, let's connect on Instagram then, or you'd propose that would be your first line of whatever.
Well, I'd always try to close them on WhatsApp, WhatsApp you couldn't do without a number, but Snapchat, Instagram, something like that, because their threshold for giving that out is a lot lower than giving out their number.
Yeah,
like I
exactly.
literally had a girl tell me at one point after we had sex that, yeah, it feels kind of personal to give you my number.
Yeah, I know. It's funny what they come out with, isn't it? But no, and I think that's true. I mean, there was a school of thought that, well, you could say, oh, well, yeah, but she's going to give you her Instagram though because she just wants to get more followers, and you're not going to get a follow up after that. But I mean, but that's going back to what I said before. I mean, if she doesn't want you to contact her, or if she doesn't want to be in contact with you, then if she gave you her number, she just wouldn't respond to your message. So it doesn't really matter, does it? Whereas if she gives her Instagram and she wants to be in contact with you, then she will respond. So
yeah, exactly. And you could also have the opportunity to design a good Instagram, so that just social proofs you and sells you, because they are going to scroll through your pictures.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what's your Instagram game like? Have you got a good page? Have you got anything
my Instagram game is fucking abysmal, man.
Because John MLD, he set up a new he set up that new, obviously he set up that new that new Instagram account, that was called Hot Dude Life, but I think he's just called John. He's just called it Jonathan now, and it's basically like it's a personal account, but it's an account that he will give to girls in order to hook up. And he's very carefully curated the pictures, and he does a lot of stories on there and stuff with him doing kind of cool things and with his dog and blah blah blah. And I'm going to use that. I would use that as a template because he seems to have built it very well. I mean, I've got obviously my main Troy Francis Instagram, which is which needs work from any point of view, either from commercial or personal, really. But it's mainly just pictures of me looking moody, which is, I'm sure some people like very much, but I'm not sure it's a great DHV type thing. And then I've got a personal one as well, which is also pretty horrendous because it's got a lot of sort of arty shots of things I've seen around different cities, but it's not really a DHV type thing. So I think I would be inclined to set up a third one, which is more geared towards what you're talking about, which is, oh, this guy looks pretty cool, and he's got some interesting stuff going on. So I think it's worth spending a bit of time to build that up, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I would probably do that too at this point. I would just do like a one from scratch. Yeah. And just get whatever cool pictures you have and just preload it and then just build on that. Because I just don't think Instagram is one of those mediums where you can kind of fuck with your message. Like Twitter, you can put whatever you're thinking or feeling in the moment out and it's gone in like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
But with Insta, it's going to be more that if you're going to use it for a specific purpose, you have to carefully curate it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Although, I suppose, well, you do. But stories are certainly a lot more important now, aren't they? I mean, having said that, that doesn't undermine what you just said, because she's just going to flick through your feed anyway. But stories are very important, aren't they? I think a lot of people are looking at stories almost first, probably. But again, you've got to curate that carefully. I quite like actually that thing about Twitter, though, in the sense that you can just put like nonsense on there and it's kind of like it's gone and nobody cares, or they do kind of care at the moment, but in the moment, but like it's just like, so what? I think that's quite funny. I quite like that aspect of it.
Well, Twitter is like, for me, it's more about entertainment. It's a good way to connect with other content because Twitter is very good at kind of linking you up with people who are sort of in the similar space that you are. So you can actually get in touch with and network with other content creators and network with people who are consuming your content too. Yes. But it's not really good for anything other than that. And I just find it good for entertainment value because there's so much dumb shit on there.
Well, I'm more like, I'm shitposting on mine more than anything these days, really. I mean, not everything that I say on there is serious. I mean, a lot of what I say on there is not serious. Like today I posted about, I'm saying I'm going to make a sex tape to prove to my haters that I'm actually heterosexual and, boasting about how great the sex tape's going to be and all this kind of shit. I mean, it's all nonsense, but it's kind of funny. It's just stuff that amuses me in the moment, and you can just whack it out there. And I quite like that aspect of it. But you're right. I mean, it's not. It's very Instagram's something very, very different. You can't get away with that on Instagram, I don't think.
I probably could, but then you have to dedicate the account to being the best at it.
Yeah, there are some very, very good meme accounts, very funny meme accounts and stuff. But if you're doing like a thirst trap account for dating, then it's a different sort of project. So, But listen, anyway, we've been on for nearly 90 minutes now, so a good chunk of time. And I know you've got some work to go on and do this afternoon. And I've got to go and go into Rule Zero Live, which is going to be kicking off fairly shortly. And hopefully you'll be along to that at some point over the weekend as well. But as always, fantastic to have you on. Great chat. And I think we've, really done some great service for the cause of degeneracy today in the stream. So thumbs up for that. Is there anything that can you tell the guys where they can find you? Stuff you've got coming up, any news, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I am working on book 3. There's, as always, like 200 articles on blacklabellogic.com and my Twitter feed at blacklabellogic. And I hope to jump in on that Rule Zero conference. It looks to be one hell of a seminar. So wish I could have been a part of it. It's unfortunately, I hadn't had much time lately.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a fantastic array of speakers there for sure. It's going to be a great event. I'm really looking forward to it. Very nice way to spend the next couple of days. So yeah, check out blacklabellogic.com. Also, Carl's books, Gendernomics and Gendernomics 2.
Yeah, but by the way, is it true? Is it true that George Bruno is speaking at the Rule Zero event about how to wax your taint?
Yeah, keynote speaker. Keynote speaker. Yeah, absolutely. I think he's actually got. I think he's doing a seminar on how to tan the what is it called? The space between the rectal opening and the balls.
No, that's the taint.
Yes, absolutely. So he will be. So we talk about the same talk. So he'll be doing a workshop, I think, actually on how to tan that. So yeah. If anybody wants late tickets, then drop me a message in the DMs on Instagram or drop me a comment below here. So thanks guys for tuning in. It's been a great stream as always. I'll be back on Monday with another one of these at the usual time of 11:30 a.m. EST. In the meantime, please do subscribe to the channel by hitting the red button below. That really, really helps me out. And obviously you get notified when there's new content coming up, which there is most days on the channel. Hit that little notifications bell as well, so you see when the new videos come up. Beyond that, that's about it, really. Join my free email list as well. You'll see a link below in the description. And if you want to read some of my world-class musings on dating, game, the sexual marketplace, etc., then grab Renegade Dating Blueprint as well, which is a collection of 11 of my books in a bundle. You can get that down below. And that's it, really. Thanks ever so much, Carl. It's been great. And we will see you guys again very soon.